Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. In this video, you're checking out an updated Magicka Sorcerer build for the Greymoor chapter. But not only that, this is a Vampire Sorcerer using the brand new Vampire abilities from the Greymoor chapter. And this is a lot of fun to play, you guys. We've got tons and tons of spell damage, great survivability, great healing. So if you're looking for a way to play a Vampire on your Mag Sorc, then this is the build for you. As usual, we'll go over the stats, the gear set options, skills, champion points, talk about the outfit style, and go over a basic rotation at the end. And all that's coming up right now. All right, everybody, here we are back on the Magicka Sorcerer for an updated solo build for the Greymoor chapter. This is going to be a Sorcerer / Vampire build. So checking out the new Vampire abilities and how those synergize with a build for the Magicka Sorcerer. This is going to be primarily a solo build, so keep that in mind. But you can make some adjustments here for more of a DPS group setup if you want. So we'll talk about that as we go through it. But let's go ahead and buff up first and check out our stats. Make sure I use a potion as well. So the baseline stats coming in at about 35k max Magicka, almost 20k health, almost 10k stamina. 1400 Magicka recovery is pretty good, 800 stamina recovery, 3200 weapon damage, and 53% spell critical. Now that is without our back bar glyph or our vampire buffs. So with our spell damage buffed as a vampire, you can see that goes over 4k. And then with our back bar glyph, that'll be closer to 4.6k spell damage. We do have more spell critical as well from our sorcerer passive, so that'll be closer to 60% overall. And of course, our resistances will be up higher most of the time due to our self buff there. So about 16k spell resistance, 15k physical resistance, 64 points into max Magicka, of course, because we are the Magicka Sorcerer build for this particular setup. Using the blue food, so max health, max Magicka. For the Mundus Stone, Thief Mundus, it's going to be good just to get our spell critical close to that 60% mark. Remember, our healing on the Magicka Sorcerer does come from crit damage. So we want a decent crit chance on this build, in my opinion. Vampire Stage 1. Now, this has been adjusted back and forth. It doesn't cost you quite as much now, but you can still see regular ability costs increase by 3%. And then you have the negative health recovery. You have more flame damage, 5% flame damage taken. And then your vampire abilities cost 6% less. So I don't know if you want to go higher than stage 1, honestly, but you can play around with it and see what you think. Minor protection, major prophecy, we'll talk about where we get those buffs from in a minute. Now for your potions, definitely you definitely want the tri-stat potions, I think, especially for the health and the stamina sustain. That's going to be important, especially if you're soloing. And then in terms of the race, I think you do have some good options for a vampire setup. Now I am right now on a high elf, and that's because high elves have more damage and pretty good sustain on the stamina side. With that spell recharge passive, you get 640 Magicka or stamina back, whichever is lowest. That's going to be usually your stam pool. And then Bane's Boon, you get the max Magicka by 2000, and then Elemental Talent, you get the 258 spell damage. That's going to be very helpful just for pushing out as much damage as possible. Now, if you feel like you're struggling a little bit with sustain, Breton is always a good choice, especially on the Magicka Sorcerer, since sustain is kind of an issue for this class. Overall, I do recommend Breton, especially if you're a newer player, just to help out with that sustain. So those would be my top 2 picks, High Elf and Breton. I think that covers the basics. Let's talk about the gear sets. Starting off with New Moon Acolyte. This is going to be our primary damage set, and we're just using this on the front bar, you guys. So just 3 pieces of jewelry, and then our front bar staff. So for the jewels here, I went with spell damage on 1, Magicka recovery on the other 2. Then my traits here, I have 2 bloodthirsty traits and 1 arcane. Now obviously glyphs and traits are adjustable here, but I do like the bloodthirsty, running 2 of these because I'm not running the class execute specifically. So this is going to mean that my damage does increase by about 20% once that enemy is below 25% health. That's just automatic with the bloodthirsty trait, so I do like that. Especially on a solo build, you just don't have to think about it and you end up doing more damage. Now for the weapon front bar, I prefer an Inferno Staff. Inferno Staff is nice because it does buff our single target damage, which is going to buff our spammable. our main spammable on this build, whether you decide to use a Destro staff skill or you want to try out the new Vampire spammable skill. We'll talk about both here in a minute. But the Inferno staff does buff those by 8% just from your Destruction staff passives. It also does fire damage, which is going to help with proccing our monster set. Now, I do like the infused trait on this staff. That's because we can grab a damage shield enchant like you see here, and we can get almost a 5k damage shield for free every 5 seconds. So that is pretty nice. And of course, the stats overall are very nice on New Moon Acolyte. You've got the spell critical, you've got the spell damage, spell penetration, and a huge chunk of spell damage at the end. But you do have the 5% cost increase. Now, we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to our abilities, but the way I've set this up on the Vampire, this really only affects 2 abilities. And remember, this is just on the front bar. We're not going to run this on the back bar. So your main abilities, your costly abilities are on the back bar, so that's not going to be affected by New Moon Acolyte at all. So the damage and the extra crit, the extra penetration, it's just one of the best sets in the game, in my opinion, especially for solo builds. Just keep that in mind. Back bar then, you can decide to run any staff you want. I prefer a lightning staff with an infused trait and then the weapon and spell damage enchant. It's going to give you a lot of spell damage for free every 5 seconds. Now, it does not have to be a Maelstrom lightning staff. This is just something that I put on the build. It could be literally any lightning staff. You could do a willpower lightning staff. You could do a basic crafted lightning staff. I just wouldn't do a New Moon Acolyte lightning staff necessarily because we're not going to be on the back bar very often, and then you'll get that extra cost increase. Now, for our second 5-piece set, we've got another offensive set here, but kind of an interesting one, the Overwhelming Surge set. And this is a dungeon set, so you'll need to do a little bit of farming, but I think if you get 5 pieces for the body, it's probably the easiest way to run this. Now, this does give you max Magicka, 2 spell damage bonuses, and then for the 5-piece here, when you deal damage with a class ability, you have a chance to surround yourself with shock damage. So that's AoE shock damage every second for 6 seconds. And 15% of that, by the way, gets restored back to you as Magicka. So I mentioned earlier, Magicka Sorcerer has a bit of a sustain issue, I think, especially if you're playing solo. This set is a really nice way to get around that because we're doing damage. We're doing shock damage, which goes with our class passives. But we're also getting that nice Magicka restore every time we do damage. Again, 15% of that proc damage that's going to come back as Magicka to the build. So a really nice way to do damage and sustain at the same time, which I think works pretty well on the Sorcerer class overall. Now, if you don't have this, any damage set really can do fine. In place of this, you could run like Julianos, you could run Spinners, something for the time being until you farm those body pieces. Now, last but not least, let's talk about the monster set. So I'm going with Elambris just for the kind of Sorcerer classic set here. This gives us max Magicka on the 1 piece. And then when you deal flame or shock damage, you can summon a meteor shower, does about 2,700 damage in an AoE for 5 seconds. And this effect can occur every 8 seconds. Now notice you can do flame or shock damage, and you summon a meteor of that damage type. So you can actually proc both of these. For the flame damage, of course, we've got the flame staff, so those light attacks should be weaving in light attacks. Those will give you a chance to proc the flame damage meteor. And then shock damage, that's a no-brainer. Most of our abilities are shock damage. Plus, this can also proc off of Overwhelming Surge, which is also shock damage. So that's just a really nice damage option. It does kind of go with the theme of the Sorcerer, I thought. So that's what I'm using on this particular setup. Now, if you want some other options, maybe something more defensive, you can definitely throw on Ice Heart for the free damage shield. That would be very nice for soloing like world bosses, or if you want to do more difficult content like veteran dungeons or VMA, definitely check out Ice Heart. But for just a nice general damage option, Elambris is pretty cool. In terms of the weights, we are doing 5-1-1. So 5 light on the body. That's going to be our overwhelming. So the light chest, waist, hands, legs, and feet. That's just the weight that this set comes in. Divines as the traits, all max Magicka as the enchants. And then for the 1-1, the 1 heavy, you'll want a heavy helmet for your monster set, whatever you're using. And then a medium shoulders. I just went with the base enchants there. That's health on the helmet and then stamina on the shoulders. Again, divines for the trait if you can get them because that's going to max out your Mundus Stone. But I believe that's everything. We went over. So it's overwhelming on the body. Got New Moon Acolyte for the front bar staff and the jewelry. Maelstrom or any backbar lightning staff is fine, and then Alambris for the monster set. All right, skills. This is where it kind of gets interesting. We're going to check out the new vampire skills, you guys. Starting with our front bar, we're running Sated Fury. This increases your weapon and your spell damage by 660. Now, this is, like I said, from the vampire skill line, new in the Greymoor chapter. It's the second ability that you get. Now, it does cost health every second, and the cost does increase as well. So it's hard to maintain this for a long time, but sorcerers have so much healing that you probably can maintain it for probably the longest of any class. Maybe Nightblade can maintain it slightly longer. But you can see for this morph, when you toggle the ability off, you heal for 34% of the total health cost that you spent. So you should be able to maintain this for quite a while. And then when you turn it off, if you decide to turn it off, you'll get a nice juicy burst heal from this ability. That's why I kind of prefer this morph. The other morph gives you slightly more spell damage, but it doesn't give you that burst heal at the end. So kind of think of this as a Magicka version of Rally. The longer you have it up, the bigger the burst heal. And since we're not running the Matriarch pet for a heal on this build, actually works kind of nice on the Magicka Sorcerer, I think. You have a front bar burst heal. You don't have to double slot that annoying bird pet, and you can get the burst heal this way. So pretty cool skill. I like it on the Magicka Sorcerer. Next up, of course, we've got Summon Volatile Familiar. That's from the Daedric Summoning skill line. It's the first ability that you get. The Volatile Familiar is kind of your damage morph, so it does AoE shock damage around you every 2 seconds for 10 seconds, and then the final pulse also does a nice AoE stun, which is very good for clearing your way through dungeons. If you're farming experience or gold or something like that, make sure you are casting this every 10 seconds, both for the AoE damage and for the AoE stun. We also get some really nice passives from having a pet active, which we'll talk about in a minute. Next up, Crystal Frags. This is from Dark Magic. First ability that we get here. Crystal Frags is the instant cast morph. So when you cast any other magic ability on the bar, you have a 35% chance of causing the next Crystal Frag to be instant, deals more damage, and it costs half the Magicka. So you should only ever be casting the instant frag proc. When your hands light up, when the icon turns kind of pinkish, that's the only time you should be casting this because it costs 50% less and it does a lot more damage. Remember we talked about New Moon Acolyte's going to increase the cost of our abilities. Well, since we're only casting this for half the cost, 5% is literally no big deal. And remember, you do have to cast a Magicka ability to proc that Crystal Frag, which brings us to our next ability from the Vampire skill line. This is called Arterial Burst. Go back into the Vampire skill tree really quick. So this is the first ability that you get. You rend an enemy dealing almost 10k magic damage that's unbuffed right now. Deals more damage based on your missing health. And if you're under half health, it will always be a critical strike. Now this new Vampire spammable is very strong, you guys, but it's only strong on a couple classes. I would say Magicka Nightblade is good with this. I do have another Magicka Nightblade build using this. You can check out on my channel. But then I would say also Mag Sorc is pretty strong with this. Now it is melee. It is a melee ability. But when you consider what else the Mag Sorc has access to, this is much cheaper than Force Pulse, and it actually does more damage. So let's compare it really quick. Arterial Burst, and then Force Pulse. You can see Force Pulse costs 600 more Magicka on my front bar. Also does quite a bit less damage. Probably about 1,000 damage less overall. Now, Force Pulse does have the nice benefit of being having that kind of AoE splash effect. If the enemy has a status effect, then 2 nearby enemies will take bonus magic damage. So this can be nice for like grinding because you can get some AoE splash damage off Force Pulse. I would consider that, but for something like a single target boss fight, Arterial Burst is so much better. It's so much easier to sustain, and it does more damage. And of course, the other thing with this is we're going with the Magicka costing morph, not the health cost morph, because since this costs Magicka, it will proc Crystal Frags. Remember, this can only proc off any ability that costs Magicka. So if you try the other morph, Blood for Blood, it will not proc Crystal Frags at all. So definitely a very cool option for the vampire themed build. Of course, it is melee range only. So just keep that in mind. You'll have to be up close and personal on your Mag Sorc to really use that ability. Now, next up, we just got a passive here. We're running Inner Light. That is from the Mages Guild, which is right here. Inner Light, this morph gives you 5% max Magicka while slotted, plus you gain passive Major Prophecy, so that's 10% extra spell critical. This is really nice, you guys. We can use the Tri-Stat potions on this build because we have both our Major Sorcery and our Major Prophecy buff thanks to our skills. Of course, this is just passive, so it's giving us bonus max Magicka too. Now, if you are in a more difficult fight, I would recommend swapping that out for a damage shield. In that case, you can run Hardened Ward. That's from the Daedric Summoning skill line. Right here, the second to last ability that you get. And you get that nice juicy damage shield. That's going to be really good for some hard-hitting bosses. If they're getting through your shield from your enchant, then definitely think about picking up Hardened Ward in that place. And then finally, let's talk about the ultimate here. This is from the Psijic Order skill line, and it's called Temporal Guard. This is really just a passive front bar ultimate, you guys. So you can see there at the bottom, while you have this slotted, you gain minor protection that reduces all your incoming damage by 8%. And we're literally never going to cast this. We're just using it for the passives, which we'll talk about in a minute. We also get a nice bonus damage shield here when blocking on our front bar. That little bubble right there, that's a free damage shield from having any Psijic Order ability slotted. So for solo gameplay, this is definitely the way to go. If you want to do something more DPS focused, then you can pick up Meteor. Meteor will be nice for the damage, plus you get extra passive max Magicka and Magicka Recovery. All right, let's check out our back bar, which is our Lightning Staff infused. You got Summon Volatile Familiar again because we got to have a double slotted. It is the pets. Then next up, Blockade of Storms. This is from the Destruction Staff skill line. That is the second ability that you get. Elemental Blockade, that's the morph that you want. Because this lasts longer, so 14-second duration. This also can set enemies off balance, and it will proc your spell damage enchant on the back bar. So that's an important source of maximizing your spell damage. So you want to make sure you keep this up all the time, because it will proc the enchant even when you bar swap. A lot of people don't realize that. Cast Blockade on your back bar quickly, bar swap, go into your Arterial Burst, and Blockade just keeps ticking, and it keeps proccing the enchant. So make sure you use that. And then next up, Elemental Drain, also from the Destruction Staff skill line. This is just another source of sustain plus a debuff. So Major Breach, that reduces an enemy spell resistance by 50 to 80. That actually counts for a lot of damage, you guys, especially on bosses who are maxed out in terms of resists. You want to make sure you have Elemental Drain on them at all times. And you also get the extra Magicka sustain. So 300 Magicka back every 1 second. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it really adds up. And it makes this build easier to sustain. Then we just got our two buffs here at the end. So Critical Surge is from the Stormcalling class line. It's the second to last ability here. This is our source of spell damage. So 20% bonus spell damage for 33 seconds and healing. So check it out. When you deal critical damage, you get healed for 3464. That's buffed with our champion points, and that can crit as well, you guys. So when that crits and with the CP set up the way we have, that's going to heal you for over 6,000 health every second. So when I was talking about, Mag Sorc is probably one of the better classes to deal with the loss of health from running Sated Fury. That's where that health is going to come from, because every 1 second you should be getting healed by Crit Surge. Just make sure you have the buff active, you guys, because if you don't have it, you're going to die. You're going to be dead because you need this healing coming back every second. And then Boundless Storm. Boundless Storm is great because this provides an extra damage over time in an AoE around you. So again, those are extra chances for crit damage. That's an extra chance to heal you. Also, the fact that this is a Sorcerer class ability, this is going to be another way to proc Overwhelming Surge. Since we're not casting a lot of abilities on our front bar, we're basically just casting Arterial Burst. That's not a Sorcerer class spammable, so this will not proc Overwhelming. So you need to maintain this on the back bar. Boundless will proc your Overwhelming Surge pretty consistently because, like I said, it is AoE and it is damage over time. And of course, it also gives us our bonus resistances there, 50 to 80 physical and spell resistance. Plus the extra movement speed is nice. Last but not least, let's talk about our back bar ultimate. Two options. Actually, three options here I think are pretty good. Let's talk about the Vampire Ultimate first of all, since this is a vampire-themed build. I prefer, if you're going with the Blood Scion, I like the Swarming Scion morph. This gives you 10,000 max health, Magicka, and stamina. It also heals you instantly back to full, which is not bad. But then this does AoE damage around you. So this is the return of the Bat Swarm, basically almost 3k damage per second in an AoE, and we're getting healed. So 15% of all the damage that we deal, that's going to be transformed back into healing for us. It does last for 20 seconds, so that's a decent duration. And so this is going to be nice just for, plowing through enemies in a dungeon. It's going to be nice for all the extra healing against a boss. I wouldn't say it's like the best, ultimate in the game at this point, but it's definitely fun and looks pretty cool. If you haven't seen it yet, here's basically what the transformation looks like. You can see the bats are swarming around. That's 10 seconds. You can see all my stats get buffed as well. Now, like I said, that's just optional. You can throw on a more DPS-focused ultimate on your back bar. Definitely consider that if you want to do more damage. I'd say the Blood Sign is just more for fun and for looks. But if you want a damage-focused ultimate, definitely put on Elemental Rage. That's from your Destruction Staff skill line. So right here, this actually costs less ultimate to cast, and it just does tons and tons of damage, you guys. It's going to be much stronger than the Vampire Ultimate if that's what you need. If you need to burst down a boss quickly, then definitely slot Elemental Rage in that spot. And I would say just another kind of fun sort of middle ground option is going to be Storm Atronach. This does very good damage. It lasts a long time, almost 30 seconds. So that's going to be a strong option there as well. Right now, passives. What passives do you need on the Sorcerer Vampire? Let's talk about Vampire passives first of all, since these are new. Feed. This is the new cost of being a vampire, basically. Each stage, you get some kind of negative here. So the health recovery does scale all the way up to 100%, meaning basically your health recovery is turned off. At stage 4, then you also take 20% more flame damage. Your regular abilities cost 12% more. So like I said, currently I don't think it's worth it. I mean, all you really get is a decreased cost of your vampire abilities. I mean, in stage 1, look at that. That's already super low, and I'm not even a Breton on this build. So I don't think it's worth it to go into higher stages currently. Now we do still have Dark Stalker, so it decreases your time entering sneak. That's kind of a fun RP passive, as well as Strike from the Shadows. If you're using Mist Form, this can buff your spell damage a little bit more. Blood Ritual, that's how you infect other players. Undeath, you do need to be stage 3 or higher. This would be nice, but again, I don't think it's worth the cost increase of your abilities currently. And then Unnatural Movement. This does let you basically become invisible after sprinting for 3 seconds, but you do have to be stage 4. So again, probably not worth it on this build necessarily. Now, in terms of your class passives, these are very important as well. So I would basically pick up all of these. I mean, Unholy Knowledge, this is cost reduction for all of our abilities, which is really nice. Blood Magic, we do get a nice heal off of Crystal Frags. So anytime you proc Crystal Frags, 2k heal, that's not bad. Persistence, you do get cost reduction after blocking. And then Exploitation, we talked about this. Spell Critical, that's something like 6 or 7% extra spell critical when using Dark Magic. Of course, we are using Crystal Frags basically at any time it shows up, so you will have that extra crit chance up basically 100% of the time. Now, in Daedric Summoning, these are good as well. You do get some bonus Magicka if your pet gets killed. Power Stone is really nice. It does reduce the cost of your ultimates. Then Daedric Protection, you get extra stamina recovery, which is good for roll dodging and blocking and sprinting. And the Expert Summoner, this passive is actually very good, you guys, for soloing especially. You get the 8% extra max health while you have your pet active. So definitely a good reason to use a pet on a solo build for sure. And then Storm Calling, we do get bonus Magicka recovery, increased shock damage. That's going to affect our Overwhelming Surge, as well as a lot of our shock abilities. Amplitude, we do 10% bonus damage, though that does scale down based on their missing health. And then Expert Mage, it's just a nice damage passive. So 6% bonus damage on our front bar. That's increased by 2% for each sorcerer ability slotted. Of course, you will want all of your Destruction Staff passives, since we are running 2 Destruction Staffs on this setup, Fire and Shock. Then Light Armor, you will want all of these. Make sure you pick up 5 passives here. Medium, really not a big deal, though I would pick up at least the first 3 Heavy Armor passives. You can get some extra physical and spell resistance, extra sustain, and extra max health from those first 3. Vampire, we already talked about. Mage's Guild, definitely want all of these, especially when running Inner Light on the front bar. Remember, you can also run Meteor for a nice damage ultimate on your front bar as well. Psijic Order, I do recommend these, especially Concentrated Barrier. That's that damage shield that we talked about while blocking, almost 6k free damage shield, which you should be blocking, you know, like a boss heavy attack anyways. Why not negate some of that damage with a free damage shield? Excellent passive. Of course, you will want your Undaunted passives maxed out if you can. PvP, not necessary on this build. You can ignore those. Then Racial passives and Alchemy Medicinal Use for the extra potion duration. Champion points. Now, this is going to be set up mostly for soloing, so just keep that in mind. You might need to adjust some of these for a group DPS build. But in our green tree, 26 into Warlord, 26 into Sprinter, 19 Tenacity, 75 Arcanist, 56 Mooncalf, 34 into Shadow Ward and Tumbling. In the blue tree, we got 19 into Blessed, 28 Elfborn, 56 Elemental Expert, 55 into Spell Erosion, 23 into Staff Expert, 66 Master at Arms. Remember, most of our damage is direct damage. That includes Arterial Burst and Crystal Frags. Not a lot of dots on this build, honestly. That's why we only have 23 into Thaumaturge. In the red tree, 61 Ironclad, 49 into Hardy and Elemental Defender, 34 into Thick-Skinned, 40 into Bastion, that's for our damage shields, and then 37 into Quick Recovery. In terms of outfit styles, let's talk about that, and then we'll do a quick rotation. So the body is just a mix of Argonian. It's going to be the Argonian robes, gloves, legs, and feet. Shoulders is going to be Mazatoon. And for the staff there, in case you're wondering, that cool little bat-themed look. Perfect for the vampire setup. That's called Order of the Hour. All right, let's talk about the setup. In terms of basic rotation, obviously you want to keep your buffs up on the back bar. That's just going to be our lightning form. And then crit surge. Crit surge is very important. Keep that up all the time. And then you want to hit the enemy with your elemental drain, especially if it's a boss. And then apply your 2 dots, which is just blockade and your pet. And then bar swap. As soon as you bar swap, you can activate that Sated Fury and just start hitting them with your burst, your arterial burst. So let me go ahead and do that again. Buffs, Ellie Drain, blockade, pet, bar swap, Sated Fury when you're on your front bar, and then just claw away. Now, if you get a Crystal Frag like I did there, make sure you proc it. There's another one, Crystal Frag. And now we're about ready to bar swap back. You can just turn Sated Fury off. You can see I got a nice little heal there, and I can just reset my buffs and my dots. Bar swap back, Sated Fury, and then claws, frags, claws, frags. Usually you won't get that many frags, but that's basically how it works. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap up this Magicka Sorcerer vampire build for the Elder Scrolls Online Greymoor chapter. Hope you guys liked this one. Of course, if you did, don't forget to crush that like button. It absolutely helps out the channel. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button for lots more build videos just like this one. And make sure you have those notifications turned on so you don't miss anything. There's links to my social media and my new website down below. Make sure you check those out. There will be a written version of this build on the website as soon as the build goes live on YouTube. So make sure you head over to the website if you want to reference the build later on. Big shout out to all our channel members here at HTM. If you would like to support the channel, make sure you click on that join button for more information. As always, thank you all so much for watching the video today. I hope you're doing well, stay safe, and I will see you around in the next video.